The night the hem tore was not loud or dramatic, but it carried a silence that pressed against your chest and made you notice every single breath. Beyond the glass walls of the executive floor, the Chicago city lights shimmered, and somewhere between the soft hum of fluorescent bulbs and the fading echo of closing elevators, a moment arrived that would quietly reshape two lives forever. It started with something small, a torn skirt, and a kind of dignity that trembles when pride and vulnerability meet. Before we go any further, pause for just a second. If you believe in kindness when no one is watching, in second chances that show up disguised as inconveniences, and in people choosing respect over impulse, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, pass it along to someone who could use a little hope, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like this still exist because people still believe that goodness matters. She was a woman accustomed to control. Margaret Collins had built her reputation in steel and glass, climbing from an intern in borrowed heels to the youngest female CEO her firm had ever appointed. Boardrooms bent to her clarity, markets responded to her decisiveness, and headlines followed her with admiration and a fair share of quiet resentment. Yet on that evening, after a charity gala hosted by her company in downtown Chicago, control slipped away in the smallest and cruelest of ways. As she stepped out of the car and made her way up the marble stairs back to the office to retrieve forgotten documents, the sharp sound of fabric tearing cut straight through her composure. Nobody else noticed it, but she felt it immediately, like a crack running through her armor. Inside the empty office, she stood alone with her hands braced against the desk, her heart racing not from fear of scandal but from something deeper. The tear ran along the side seam, subtle but unmistakable, exposing more than she ever would have allowed the world to see. In a life where mistakes were measured in millions, this felt absurdly personal. She thought about calling her driver back, considered leaving the documents behind, even considered pretending the whole thing had never happened. But the truth was simple and stubborn. She needed help, and help demanded trust. That trust arrived in the form of Andrew Walker, the late-night facilities coordinator who cleaned offices, fixed lights, and stitched small problems back together after everyone else had gone home. Andrew was not invisible, though the world often treated him that way. He had once dreamed of becoming an engineer, once believed that effort guaranteed reward, but life had taken him down a different path through hospital bills, a fractured family, and the quiet acceptance of survival work. Still, he carried himself with a gentleness born from disappointment endured without bitterness. Margaret had noticed him before, though she could not have said exactly when. Perhaps it was the way he always nodded respectfully without expectation, or the way he treated her office as a place of purpose rather than power. When she found him that night, she felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest. The situation was painfully awkward, yet in the stillness of that empty floor, it transformed into something else entirely. No raised voices, no flustered explanations, just two people standing at the edge of an unplanned moment that demanded integrity. What followed was not scandal or temptation, but restraint. Andrew turned away as she asked, his back forming a quiet wall of respect, while he explained calmly what needed to be done to keep the tear from getting worse. His hands moved with clinical care, like a tailor repairing dignity stitch by stitch rather than just fabric. Margaret, standing under those fluorescent lights, felt tears sting her eyes, not from embarrassment but from the overwhelming relief of being treated as human rather than a spectacle. In that instant, the power dynamic she had navigated her entire career simply dissolved. She was no longer the CEO, and he was no longer the man who emptied her trash. They were just two people sharing a fragile truth about vulnerability. Margaret realized how rarely she allowed herself to be seen without armor, and how exhausting it had been to carry perfection like a shield. Andrew, meanwhile, felt something he had not allowed himself in years, a sense of usefulness that truly mattered. After that night, nothing changed immediately, and yet everything did. The skirt was repaired, the documents retrieved, and they parted without ceremony. But Margaret found herself noticing Andrew more, asking his name, thanking him with a sincerity that surprised them both. Andrew found himself walking a little taller, reminded that decency still held value even when no one was watching. Their paths crossed in small ways, shared elevators, exchanged smiles, but the memory of that night lingered like a quiet promise. The challenges they faced were not dramatic, but deeply human. Margaret struggled with loneliness at the top, with the suspicion that admiration often masked resentment. Andrew wrestled with invisibility, with the fear that his best years had slipped away unnoticed. Yet each carried the seed of change planted by that single moment of mutual respect. Margaret began mentoring young women with renewed empathy, no longer preaching invincibility but resilience. Andrew enrolled in night classes, encouraged by the reminder that his hands and his mind still held value. As weeks turned into months, the company itself seemed to soften around the edges. Small policies shifted, names were remembered, people felt seen. Margaret understood now that leadership was not about standing above others, but about standing steady when someone needed you to look away, to honor their dignity without question. Andrew learned that self-worth could be reclaimed not through recognition, but through integrity practiced in silence. Just before this story ends, take a moment to comment below and share what this moment meant to you. Your words matter more than you realize. The final encounter came quietly, as meaningful things often do. Margaret passed Andrew in the lobby one morning, both carrying coffee, both smiling with the ease of shared understanding. No words were exchanged, none were needed. The torn skirt had long been forgotten, but the lesson it carried remained stitched into their lives. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness can exist even in the most awkward moments, please like, share, and engage with this video. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Stories that remind us that dignity is not given by titles or taken by circumstance, but preserved by the choices we make when nobody else is looking.